Chapter 11. The kitchen at Janet's apartment was rarely quiet in the mornings. There was always a missing book, a question about homework, or someone remembering at the last possible moment that a permission slip needed to be signed. But for a few minutes, while Tiffany and Sam finished getting ready for school, Janet and Edna enjoyed a coffee. Janet glanced toward the window, her fingers wrapped around her mug. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" Edna looked up. "What does?" "Not seeing Pearl." Edna nodded slowly. There was no need for Janet to explain. Pearl was woven into the rhythm of Pearl's Haven. A conversation in the hallway, a gentle knock on a door, a cup of tea when someone needed one. Her absence was noticeable. "James said she's all right," Janet added quickly, "and I believe him. He told Jessica if anything came up, she could go directly to him." "That sounds like James," Edna said with a small smile, "always standing close enough to catch someone, but never so close that they can't breathe." "He told me something yesterday," Janet said. "Well, told all of us, really. He said Pearl wasn't alone." Edna looked down at her coffee. "He's right." Janet nodded. "He said when Pearl is working through something, she spends a lot of time with God, reading His Word and praying. That's Pearl." There was quiet for a moment. Then Janet sighed. "You think it's because of Brittany?" Edna did not answer immediately. The last time Pearl had disappeared was the week that Brittany, her assistant before Jessica, had left in the middle of the night, taking her young daughter Layla with her. She had learned over the years that some stories deserved a moment of silence. "I wondered." Janet's expression softened. "I still remember how much Pearl trusted her." "She did," Edna said. "She trusted all of us," Janet replied. "That's what made Pearl different. She didn't make people earn kindness before she offered it." Edna smiled faintly. "No, she didn't." "I remember when everything came out, how hurt she was." "It wasn't about the money," Edna said. "No." They both understood that. It had never been about what was taken. It was about the trust that had been broken. "Pearl loved that little girl too," Janet said quietly. "Layla." Janet smiled sadly at the name. She was such a sweet child. She was. And even after everything, Pearl tried to let Brittany stay. Edna nodded. She wanted to make sure Layla had a home. But she couldn't keep her in that position. "No," Edna said gently. "Forgiveness and trust aren't always the same thing." Pearl understood that. She had responsibilities, not only to Brittany, but to every person living here. Janet looked around her apartment, her home, a place where her children were safe. "I never thought about it that way." "Pearl did," Edna said. "She always does." Just then, Sam came running through the room. "Mom, have you seen my blue sweater?" Janet pointed toward the hallway without even turning. "Chair beside your bed." Sam disappeared again. Edna laughed softly. "A mother always knows." "Not always," Janet said, smiling, "but I pretend well." A few minutes later, backpacks were packed, coats were on, and the morning rush was ready to move out the door. Before they left, Janet paused. She looked at Edna. "Can we pray for her?" Edna reached out her hand. No big words were needed, no explanations. Just two women standing in a kitchen, holding hands, quietly bringing someone they loved before God. And then the door opened, the children rushed out, and another day began at Pearl's Haven. After walking Janet and the children to the car, Edna made her way back through the front doors of Pearl's Haven. For a moment she stood in the entryway. Everything looked the same flowers, the same familiar sounds, the same feeling of home. And yet everyone could feel the absence of the woman who had helped create it. Edna smiled softly to herself and poked her head inside the office door that was held open by a handmade cat doorstop, as it usually was during the daytime. Jessica was just finishing a phone call. "Yes, absolutely. I'll send the application over now, and once we receive it back, we'll be in touch." She hung up the phone and looked up. Her face immediately brightened. "Edna." I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, not at all. Please come in." Jessica waved her toward the empty chair beside the desk. Edna sat down and glanced around the office. It still looked like Pearl's office. The little touches were everywhere. But Jessica belonged there now too. "Everything going all right?" Edna asked. Jessica smiled. "It is. Actually, that was someone calling about an apartment." "Oh?" "I emailed the application. I was just trying to decide whether when it comes back, I should print it and send it up to Pearl through James, or just leave it until Pearl comes back." Edna watched her carefully. There was no panic in her voice, no fear, just a young woman. "And what do you think Pearl would tell you?" Jessica smiled. "Probably that if it wasn't urgent, it could wait." "I think you know her well." "I'm learning," she grinned. "No," Edna said gently, "you're doing more than learning." Jessica looked at her. "I remember the young woman who walked through those doors a couple of months ago." Jessica looked down, smiling slightly. "I was a mess." "You were hurting," Edna corrected. There was a difference. "You reminded me of a little sparrow with a broken wing, still able to fly, but not quite remembering how." Jessica was quiet, reflecting in her mind what the Bible said about God's view of the little sparrows. Her heart warmed at the thought. "And now look at you." "I still have a lot to learn." Humility is not a trait that this young lady has to work at, thought Edna with a smile. "We all do," she said. Edna leaned back in the chair. "But you have no idea how much comfort you have brought Pearl." "Me?" "Yes, you." Jessica looked surprised. "I always think about everything she has done for me. That's because you see what Pearl gives. You don't always see what she receives." The words settled. "She trusts you, Jessica." Jessica blinked back the emotion that came with those words. "I don't want to let her down." "You won't," Edna said with certain conviction. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Jessica said quietly, "I was worried about Pearl, but James said that she once in a while has occasion where she needs to spend time with God to get through the more challenging things that life throws at us." Edna smiled. "Yes, and we all have tribulation of one sort or another. It is what we do in those times that reflects our relationship with God. Some hide from Him, some draw closer. Pearl draws closer." Jessica nodded as a passage from 2 Corinthians came to mind. "When I am weak, then I am strong." Edna nodded. "Exactly, a good one to remember." A little while later, Edna stood. "Well, I suppose I should let you get back to work." "I'm glad you came." "So am I." Edna reached the door, then paused. "I'm going to check the laundry room while I'm out. Make sure everything is as it should be." "Edna, you don't have to do that." "I know," she smiled. "That's why I want to." And as Edna headed downstairs to carry out her mission, Pearl's haven continued on. The doors still opened, the people still cared, the little acts of kindness continued, even while its queen bee took some much-needed time away from the hive. Jessica sat at the desk, looking over the list in front of her. Cleaning supplies, garbage bags, paper towels, light bulbs, all the ordinary little things that most people never thought about, but somehow always seemed to be there when they were needed. She smiled slightly. That was something she had learned from Pearl. A home was built just as much in the unnoticed things as it was in the big moments. Jessica picked up her pen and added one more item to the list when a gentle knock came from the doorway. She looked up. Edward stood there holding a watering can. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Should I ask?" Edward straightened his posture and gave her a serious expression. "Just reporting that all plants in the shared areas have been watered, Miss Jessica." He gave a little mock salute. Jessica laughed. It was a sound that came much easier these days. "Well, thank you, Mr. Norris. Pearl will be very happy to hear her plants survived." "Survived?" Edward repeated. He glanced down at the watering can. "I'll have you know they are thriving." "Of course. My apologies." "Accepted." The two shared a smile. Jessica looked toward the small counter where a pitcher of iced tea sat on a silver tray, with glasses waiting beside it. "Would you like a glass of iced tea before you go?" Edward looked over. For a moment, Jessica wondered if he would say no. The Edward she first met probably would have. that Edward would have completed the task, politely excused himself, and returned to the quiet of his own apartment. But that was not the man standing in front of her now. "That would be nice, thank you." Jessica smiled and stood, pouring him a glass. The tray was one of Pearl's touches. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just a reminder that people were worth taking the time for. Edward accepted the glass and leaned on the counter, looking fondly at Jessica. He hoped secretly that Joshua saw the potential of this young lady as he did. Jessica returned to her seat. "So," Edward looked at her suspiciously, "that sounds like the beginning of a question." "It might be," she teased. "I was afraid of that." Jessica smiled. "Actually, I've been thinking about that evening." "The gathering?" She nodded. "I get the feeling that although it was a very understated event with no specific reason behind it, it meant something to you." "You are not wrong," Edward said with a sigh. Sometimes an old man can get a notion in his head, with a sense of urgency that it must be acted on at once. "It was a good evening, wasn't it?" Edward deftly deflected the questioning of why it occurred, and brought attention to the event itself. He was anxious to hear Jessica's thoughts on how it had played out. "It was nice," Jessica admitted. "More than nice, actually. I think I finally stopped feeling like the new person." Edward's expression softened. "Then I'd say the evening accomplished something worthwhile." Jessica studied him for a moment. "Is that what you hoped would happen?" Edward took another drink of his iced tea. "Jessica, at my age I've learned that when something turns out well, it's sometimes best not to examine my motives too closely." Jessica laughed. Edward smiled into his glass. Pearl would have seen straight through him. Then again, Jessica was beginning to as well. Outside the office, footsteps passed through the hallway. Somewhere downstairs, a washing machine began another cycle. The plants had been watered. The office was running. People were looking after one another. Pearl was still away, but Pearl's haven was doing just fine. And perhaps that was one of the greatest gifts Pearl had given them. They had learned how to care for the haven and for one another, even when she wasn't there.